one of the things I wanted to ask our panelists is, jobs has been a theme throughout today, and we've talked a little bit about workforce development, we've talked a little bit about retooling, but so one of the things that I've thought is, well, why can't we train our truck drivers to be drone operators as well? Isn't there a market for both of those technologies? And the bot technology here doesn't necessarily need to displace, say, a postmate who would be driving their car. Now they're the human operator at that 1% level to make sure that the delivery makes it there on time and safely. So I think that there are ways that we can be innovating not only on the technology side, but on the people side as well. So I wanted to just kind of ask the panel a little bit if you've given any thought to the workforce development side, and if you have any ideas for maybe out-of-the-box ideas that could be used to generate some of those smart jobs that Randy was talking about earlier. Sure.
Perhaps I'll take a first stab at it. So we've certainly thought about this a lot. As Marnie had mentioned, we certainly do create other types of jobs as well, though we do not necessarily kill jobs. This has been certainly a key issue, especially when, with our partners at DoorDash and Postmates. Many couriers have asked us, hey, are you guys replacing us with robots? Quite frankly, and truthfully, we are not. We're complementing sort of the supply, the labor capability and the means of transportations that the fleet currently has, and each one has its own strengths and weaknesses. For example, DoorDash and Postmates may have walkers, bicyclists, scooter drivers, and cars, and each one has its own strengths and weaknesses, just like robots would. So, for example, many couriers actually really hate to take on the orders that are, around $10 or $8 or $5 that folks order from local restaurants or Starbucks or something, and which are generally short distances because, a good 30 to 40% of their income is from tips. And so we actually help take on those orders that couriers actually don't like to take. And so from that perspective, that's just on the supply side for the drivers and the workers. But on the consumer side, what this really means is that as we bring down the cost of delivery to about $1 over the mid to long run, this means that whenever you forget something small at Safeway or Whole Foods, or perhaps you just wanted to get a quick soda from down the street, you could have an on-demand, personal delivery robot pick it up for you 24/7 at any time for about $1. So, it helps to perhaps increase commerce as well, stimulate the economy and help people spend a little bit more than they otherwise would have, while also increasing convenience and not affecting jobs. So that's kind of our take and kind of how we kind of see the space.
Yeah, and I'd just add to that I don't think anyone really expects that autonomous vehicle technology is going to happen tomorrow. There's going to be a lot of incremental steps along the way to actually pulling a driver completely out of a vehicle, especially a truck. The demands on the trucking industry are so diverse. You're talking about driving on logging roads where there is not going to be any sort of vehicle to infrastructure communication. Having to do tomato harvests in the Central Valley. There's just so many different sort of situations that you run into in the different applications. It's going to be a long time before we're talking about actually displacing truck drivers. The way I like to say it, you have to be 21 years old to get a commercial driver's license. I would be shocked if someone 21 years old getting a license today loses their job to self-driving vehicles. A lot of the features are designed to actually enhance the safety of the driver. So commercially, in private passenger vehicles today, you can get automatic braking, lane departure warnings. As we climb up the levels of automation, it's just going to be sort of enhancing those features and combining them to allow the driver to release the control during certain situations, hopefully reduce the fatigue, increase the efficiency of that operation. And those are the steps that are really going to be sort of evolutionary before we ever start talking about taking a driver completely out of the vehicle.
Yeah, I would say that when when I answer this as a we, I'm talking about the collective state agencies that were working on the action plan. We've been trying to figure out the answer to the questions of whether or not, as the technology is coming in and coming online, as Chris is talking about, is it truly a displacement of existing jobs, in which case, yes, we do need to figure out some retooling, or is it really trying to help fill some of the current demand? So as Chris also mentioned earlier, there's a huge demand in the trucking industry, and we don't see that going away. We see there being projections as much as a 40% increase of the goods that are coming in. I know when I look in both my teenage daughter's rooms, they got a lot more crap than I ever had. I'm assuming your 1-year-old does too. So I don't think that's going to stop. So we know that there's going to be more freight coming into our state, and we know that the population is going to grow and buy more stuff. So I think we're trying to figure out how much of it is displacement, in which we need to look at retooling, versus how much is it providing the educational opportunities for the new jobs that are coming online. There are some cases where there are some folks that are transitioning, I would say, jobs. The crane drivers at the ports is a great example. So there's some automation that's happening at the ports themselves. Those crane drivers are not losing their job. They were up on top of the crane before, literally looking down like 200 feet into the hull of the vessel to pick up. There's like a glass floor, and I wouldn't want that job. But they're picking it up and they're putting it in. Their new job is sitting at a computer up in a tower that's looking at a monitor and helping to guide that computerized system. So they still have a job. It's actually safer. It's in a better work environment for them, and they, can actually help move more around. So I don't really know the answer as to what the real issue is, and we're trying to figure that out so that we can make sure that the jobs are available for the future.
Thanks. I agree with all of those, and I also want to say, having spent a number of years in the computer business, I don't think any computer ever reduced a job. If anything, they create jobs. They shift jobs to other focuses that are more customer related, more customer service related, more safety related, more service related from a volume standpoint. I mean, we all have these. It certainly hasn't reduced my workload. If anything, it's increased it because I get more information and I can deal with things faster and more accurately. So I don't think we're going to see any job decreases.
Great. So before we get to audience questions, I have one more question for the panel, and then we'll open it up to audience questions. One of the major themes for our innovation workshop today is environmental stewardship, and making sure that the choices that we make are setting Marin and California up for success, growth economically, but also protecting our way of life, protecting the quality of our environment, our air quality, our water quality, guarding against exacerbating climate change. So what are the things that we haven't talked about yet today that you might be aware of that are sort of impacting the environmental protection side of the delivery economy? Because I think, with mobile sources being the main derivative, if you will, of our negative air quality, there's a strong drive to make changes there, but there's also an economic consequence to that as well. And so there's a little bit of a push-pull, and how do we protect those jobs and the mom and pop operations, but also make sure that we're greening our fleet and greening our grid and coming together to have a more sustainable freight network?
I'll start since this falls more in my wheelhouse. So the one thing that I would like to highlight that I think would be very helpful is again, I heard a lot about greenhouse gases today. And I think it's not only critically important, but it is an absolute must that everybody that's making these types of decisions is analyzing not only the GHG impacts, but the criteria. And you need to be very conscious of the impacts of all the decisions. And for instance, there are some decisions that can be made that would be a benefit when it comes to climate, but is going to significantly hurt the criteria side of things. So although the innovation is great, we would very much suggest that to make sure that you look at the total impact. One of the things that Chris will probably talk about is technology advancements in their area, which for instance, fuel just savings. Some of the things that we've put forward that have caused reductions in criteria has increased their fuel and increased their fuel costs, which increased GHG, which means that's why we're saying the ultimate goal is zero. We need to get to electric and we need to get to fuel cell, because that's going to be the fuel savings cost and the technology that we need. But as you're making those decisions, make sure you're analyzing all of the pollutants associated with it.
Yeah, and just to add on to that, as I talked a little bit about in the presentation, you know, we've done a lot. We've made a lot of progress on traditional pollutants like particulate matter, NOx, to combat smog, to the point where we're sort of squeezing the last little bit out of that. However, the new policy drivers moving away from the Clean Air Act traditionally regulated 6 criteria pollutants, as was alluded to by Heather. But we're moving into the era of climate change, where the ARB did some good research. Some staff up there did an analysis of all the policies that are on the table at the state and federal level that are being implemented or in the hopper. And will we meet the ultimate climate change goals of, we have this interim goal of 40% below 1990 levels by 2030, 80% by 2050. Are we going to get there? And the conclusion was we're not going to get there with anything that we already know is on the table. What we need to do is drive towards electric drive technologies. Even the freight sector has to go to zero emissions. And so that's what I think the last 3 years of work that we've engaged in with the Air Resources Board has been about, is how do you move from, you know, a light duty electric vehicle is one thing. How do you move 80,000 pounds across the entire country with electric drive? That's sort of the divide that we're trying to fill right now. And just having done some of the initial work on commercializing electric drive technology, where, you know, I can say we're not anywhere close to where private passenger vehicles are today for the trucking side. It's going to be a huge effort. Coordination between utilities, manufacturers of trucks and engines, fleet users, the public sector. It's going to require a massive investment and a lot of very careful planning so that we don't get this wrong and we don't end up with a bunch of stranded assets. That work is ongoing, but, you know, stay tuned. We're not quite there yet, but this is all being worked on very aggressively.
Yeah, and so just to add to all that, you know, on Starship sides, you know, we're completely electrically driven. So we run off batteries. We're going to have automated battery swapping hubs decentralized throughout different cities. You can imagine kind of hundreds of robots in a given city with maybe a half a dozen or so of these automated delivery hubs, wherein you know, robots can drive up to, battery swap, load up with a new package, and be on their way, all in the background, driving 4 miles per hour on the sidewalks, completely sustainably. You know, on a more personal side, you know, to kind of echo a little bit of Elon Musk's thoughts, you know, the kind of incentive structure is what really is at the core of all of this, is that there's a lot of externalities within kind of the pricing of carbon, for example. And so proposals such as, you know, carbon taxes would be very interesting, because it would then be able to capture externalities and bring them back into market prices, which help dictate, you know, macro and micro decision making. And so I think fundamentally, you know, if we want to reach quote unquote zero through electrification, you know, it'll eventually have to get to that level as sort of electricity and solar gets to parity levels in terms of pricing. So, but yeah, it's a very interesting topic. Yeah.
I'll make one last comment on that. I think sustainability goes beyond just the final goal. We have to remain sustainable through that entire process. And in part of my presentation, I think I talked about the transition, and you talked about as well, is going to take 10, 15, maybe it'll be 1930, 1935 before we really get there. So you have to look at the investment that has to be made during that time, and it has to be financially sustainable as well as economically sustainable. And I think that's a lot of everybody's fears. How are we going to get there? So looking at any transitions, it's very important to look at well to wheels on an economic standpoint and on a sustainability standpoint. So.
Great. And I know we have a question right over here. Molly will bring the microphone. Okay.
Thank you. Excuse me. Two of the issues discussed today are safety and the environment. And I actually have a question on each one of those. In terms of safety, I could be wrong, but it seems to me that there's a much greater number of big rig accidents that are reported these days, a lot of overturns, and I'm just curious how what all this technology fits into that. And the second thing about the environment is I haven't heard any comments about the disposing of all of the elements that go into batteries, computers, etc., all of which are very poisonous to the environment. And the more we rely on electric vehicles, the more we rely on computers, what are we going to do with all of those devastating chemicals that go into the production and use of those technologies?
Okay. You want to go ahead and start?
I'll take a first stab at that, if I may, please. And if you recall, one of my slides had a chart of where the fuels came into play. That takes into account the, and I'll use natural gas because I'm not going to talk about other people's fuel, but the renewable natural gas, the greenhouse gas emission reductions and the other emissions that are included in that include everything on a cradle-to-grave or well-to-wheels basis, including the production of the product and the disposal of the product. So I think it is in everybody's best interest, and everybody in the room agrees with that. And I think all of the panel includes those in their numbers when they do talk about that. And it's, yeah, the old NIMBY syndrome of not in my backyard. So that has to be taken into account worldwide, not just in California.
Yeah, and on the safety issue, the numbers have shown that since the 1970s, 1980s, there have been huge advances in commercial safety enforcement. California actually has the most stringent safety inspections in the country, known as the BIP program, done by the California Highway Patrol, that every terminal, under the old system, we just recently revised it, every truck terminal was inspected by the CHP every 2 years. We've actually moved, talking about innovation and technology, to a performance-based system where the Highway Patrol is actually mining data on safety, and instead of going out to the operator that we know never gets tickets, has very few accidents, the Highway Patrol can actually concentrate their resources on the terminals that they know are having issues. I know that we saw a slight uptick just in the last couple of years from very, very low levels of truck-related accidents, but we'd expect that to sort of even out. As we were talking about getting a lot of new drivers out there on the road, we're thinking maybe that's part of the issue. But a lot of these highly automated technologies, as they start getting into the market, again, are designed to sort of take care of issues of inattention, fatigue. We would expect to see some sort of positive correlation with the safety numbers at the end of the day, as well as approximately 8 out of every 10 truck-involved accident is actually the fault of the light-duty driver. And I can tell you, having never driven a big rig, but I have driven a big moving truck in my day. And when you're driving 55 miles an hour on the freeway, you say, wow, people are crazy, you know, the sort of maneuvers that they do around large trucks. And so as the technology is also integrated into private passenger vehicles, I think the whole end goal of this technology is that the motoring public is just made more safe.
Great. So we have one more question over here, and then one there, and then it'll be time for a break.
All right. Thank you. This is a question for Justin. That is a real cute little robot. I've read that they're going to be on the bike paths and the sidewalks. I am a cyclist. I can deal with one robot, but in my neighborhood, the FedEx, the UPS trucks are going back and forth delivering packages morning, noon, and almost night. And I foresee thousands of these little gizmos it will be congestion on the bike path, and the cyclists will have a hard time. And similarly, our sidewalks are quite narrow. They're only about 4 feet, which is regulation, at least for the older ones. And what's going to happen to the disabled, to the elderly, to the school kids? Are they going to be able to squeeze past all these gizmos on the sidewalks? Thank you.
Sure. Thank you for the question. Those are very valid points. Just one thing I wanted to make clear actually is that we actually exclusively drive only on sidewalks. So actually we will never drive on cycle lanes. And so just wanted to clarify. I know that sometimes press may capture incorrect information, but all of our regulatory approvals, all the cities that we operate in, are solely for sidewalk usage. And to kind of touch on the point of sidewalk density, which is a great point, if and when sort of we have hundreds of robots in various cities, what do the sidewalks look like? What we are able to do, and what we do, is, every single city we launch, we create sort of our own mapping system wherein it creates a 3D map and it's continually updated through time, because we cannot rely on something like Google Maps, which is simply for the roads. Therefore we create our own maps using computer vision, localization, and other software inputs. So what essentially happens is that for certain areas wherein the robot it's not suitable in terms of maybe the sidewalk width, or perhaps if a certain sidewalk is known to be highly dense with folks walking by, we can annotate that actually and be able to find alternative routes. And so over time the mapping will become more and more efficient and more accurate. And so certainly one thing that's also built into the algorithms is anti-obstacle detection. So it creates a sort of a little bubble around it, if you will, and because it only goes 4 miles per hour, whenever something is anticipated to come into that bubble, or if it does come into that bubble, it's able to stop within about 2 inches, even at full speed. And so to date, we have not had a single incident. We've driven over 20,000 miles in public spaces in 60 countries. 60 cities in 5 countries globally. So so far it hasn't been an issue. It's a very valid question. What happens looking forward, maybe 5 years or so, when it's a little bit more dense. We give the right of way to everyone, so the robot knows to stop and wait whenever it's a little bit too busy. And so, hopefully a lot of the kind of solutions that we've proactively come up with and also found from the real world, which works, will be kind of becoming ever more efficient and sort of accurate going forward. So,
Thank you.
it would be. I know. I've been trying to tell them,
Have to
make
put a
the
little
flag
happy
move
face
a little
on it.
bit and kind of, but maybe in the next iteration.
So we have one last question here.
Hello?
Yep.
I've wanted to ask this question for a long time, but if you drive by the Redwood landfill in Nevada, which is waste management, there's a large burn-off tower for methane. And I'm curious if any work's been done into harnessing that energy, either for generation of electricity on site or for running their fleet with the methane gas. Thank you.
I can answer that as best I can. We actually have a national contract with Waste Management and Republic Services and other waste haulers, and most of them already do have a methane capturing process in place. Landfills are one of the best because they're the oldest and they produce the most. If that one hasn't been done yet, it should be shortly. To give you an idea how quickly that market grew, in 2007, about 3% of the garbage trucks in North America were running on natural gas, and now most of them are running on renewable. And today, 70% are running on natural gas and all transitioning to renewable gas. So most of them are stopping that flaring. Now, flaring is better than just letting it escape, because at least it's burning it off before it goes. But better than that is capturing it. The reason most of the capture is coming from landfill sites right now, rather than other small waste producers like farm methane, is it's very hard to capture that because it's spread over such a large area. Landfills are typically pretty concentrated, very deep, and there's a massive amount that comes out. So if you go up into the Altamont Pass or all over the Bay Area, you'll see those things popping up. It's happening very quickly.
Well, I would like to thank our panelists today. I think that was a very enlightening conversation. And we are just going to go ahead and take about a 10-minute break and then come back because I see our final speaker of the day is here, and we're very excited to get to hear from Don Weiss soon.